ESPN1080.com's podcast here, previewing the marquee matchup this weekend in college football. Number 2 Alabama against number 12 Florida on Saturday night from Gainesville, Florida at the Swamp. I'm Eric Lopez alongside our producer, Brian Winnegar. Brian, this is welcome to college football heaven, my friend.
No, I know, and last 2 weeks ago when I went to that FSU game, I really got a taste of what football is in the state of Florida, and talk about a great game we got here. And two guys who
this is so big. We needed two people to break this game.
Two guys who know what they're talking about to battle it out. It should be good.
Of course, it's an old school game. So of course we have representing Florida, the man you can hear on Saturday mornings, 10 to 11, with Brian Winnegar, talking Gators and old school, Mr. Roger Franklin Williams. An honor to join you.
Thanks for having me. It's great. Appreciate it.
And then also on the line, Mr. Winnegar, we got Alabama represented, don't we, from the Tracy Dent Show.
From the Tracy Dent Show, Mr. Ken Allen. What's up, Ken?
Not much, fellas. How's it going?
Good.
Very good, boys. So let's get into it, guys. I mean, Alabama, Florida, both teams undefeated. Roger, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on the Gator season up to this point?
I'll tell you, as a hardcore partisan Gator, it's been absolutely gratifying to see what Charlie Weiss has done with this offense. I mean, and as we hardcore Gators know, and maybe some other more casual fans may not know, but I'm sure hardcore SEC fans will know, Florida had a complete moron running the offense last year, Steve Adazio. I mean, they turned the program over, with Urban Meyer's various crises. Steve Adazio wound up running the Florida Gator program, a career offensive line coach, and being the offensive coordinator. And so, essentially, without going too far down that tangent, a lot of talent went underutilized. He destroyed the quarterback, instituted the infamous three-headed quarterback system, and so Florida's season turned out like it did last year. Now it's gratifying to see a true maestro come in and pick up the offense and utilize the talent that he has, and utilize it beautifully, utilizing each player's specific talents.
So are you surprised at their start?
Well, I unlike many of my fellow Gators, I'm always trying to keep my expectations in check and a little bit low. So I was hoping for a 3-1 season coming in. So I'm very pleasantly surprised.
Ken, what's been your thoughts from afar on the Gators?
Oh, I was up at Fort Wayne, Indiana when Charlie Weiss was the head coach at Notre Dame, so I covered the Irish, and I knew what kind of offensive genius he was. And when he was hired by Will Muschamp, even Tracy Dent and I talked about this, that John Brantley was going to flourish in this offense. So I am not surprised at all that the Gators are where they are at 4-0, because frankly they really haven't played anybody yet. And the next month will determine how good this offense is against some really good defenses, especially the next two Saturdays. I mean, Florida, with having to play Bama and LSU back-to-back, to me that is just incredible, where you're probably getting the best two defenses in the country in back-to-back weeks. And how you are going to be able to play against LSU really depends on what happens in this game with Bama. So I am very pleased with what Florida has done, because Charlie Weiss is an offensive genius. It's right where I thought they would be, 4-0 coming into this game, so they haven't done anything. I guess the biggest surprise to me on both Florida and Alabama is that the leading receivers on both these teams are running backs.
Yeah.
Rainey and Demps are the top two receivers for Florida, and we have Trent Richardson is one of the leading receivers for Alabama, and at least we do have a real wide receiver as one of our other leading receivers in Marquise Mays. So it's just amazing to me that Florida relies so much on Demps and Rainey, and if Alabama can shut those guys down with Trey Burton, it's going to be a cakewalk for them on Saturday night.
Well, let's to more on Alabama. I mean, I saw Alabama at the Cap One Bowl. Their offense is new. They lost Mark Ingram, a former Heisman Trophy winner. McElroy, you got McCarron at quarterback. How's the offense looked for Alabama? It's kind of been sketchy at times. You had McCarron and Sims splitting early in the year. Now it's kind of McCarron's show. Give us the thoughts on Alabama.
Well, I think A.J. McCarron is the correct guy to be quarterback. He did throw 2 interceptions. Both of those were in the first game against Kent State. He hasn't thrown one since. He's exactly what McElroy was when McElroy started as a junior. I mean, he's a great game manager, and he's not going to do anything that's going to beat the Crimson Tide. As great as I thought Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson were as a dynamic duo running back, I'm not so sure Trent Richardson and Lacey aren't even better than Richardson and Ingram were, because both these guys are pretty big but have the speed that you just don't expect from somebody that weighs 240 pounds. I mean, these guys are big, and they will pound you. So I think Alabama's offense, with the offensive line that they have, except for one guy who's everybody else coming back, and with A.J. McCarron being the quarterback that now has the reins of this Florida team, we're just going to depend on him to hand off to either Trent Richardson or to Eddie Lacy. Make sure that he doesn't throw any interceptions. Take advantage of our wide receivers, Marquise Mays, the tight end, Darius Hanks or Brad Smelly, and just make sure that he really handles the game management, doesn't do anything to beat us. And I think the defense of Alabama will be the difference in this game because our front seven are going to be able to contain the running game and make it a throwing, one-dimensional Florida Gator team. And if our secondary, the Alabama secondary, isn't the best in the nation, it definitely is the best in the SEC. So it's really going to be in the hands of Brantley and Charlie Weiss to decide how they are going to beat Alabama on Saturday night.
Roger, how do you want to counter with that?
Well, I would say that's one thing that I'm personally looking for is that I'm expecting the wide receivers to get more involved in the game. That's one point that we brought up is that there have been very few, if any, completions to the wide receivers thus far in the first 4 games. Now, I don't know whether Charlie Weiss and Coach Muschamp would probably say, well, that's by design. They don't want to show too much, and of course
right.
You don't want to show too much against FAU and UAB.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't know, the skeptic in me wonders, thinks that you might be able to. Why wouldn't you want to hit one down the field against FAU and UAB, just to prove that you could? But anyway, I'm expecting a concerted effort to get the wide receivers more involved in the game, and I expect to see some balls down the field.
Chris Rainey and Depps have been tremendous. Rainey, unbelievable. You can argue there may not be a better tandem backfield than you're going to see Saturday night with Alabama, as Kent mentioned, with Richardson and certainly in that group, you got Rainey and Depps just as good.
And that's a great point. And that's what I think that Coach Wise has done so brilliantly is get both of those guys heavily involved in the offense, utilizing their various talents, whether it's running between the lines, whether it's running outside, or whether it's getting them the ball via passes. And that's exactly the kind of thing that did not happen last year at all, and that's why it's been such a beautiful thing to watch this far. I would add a couple more things as well as what to look for on Florida. Like I said, I think Florida's been pretty vanilla so far, and I expect that not to be the case Saturday. I expect the tight end to be utilized much more, whether that's Jordan Reed or the number 32 Christian who scored the big touchdown against Kentucky. And I would expect Trey Burton to be a major factor in the game on actually running the ball between tackles on third down situations and in the red zone as well.
I'll ask both of you this. Both these defenses are in the top 5 in almost every category nationally. Florida's number 5 total defense. Alabama's number 2. Rush defense. Florida's number 5. Alabama's number 3. Florida's number 4 in scoring defense. Alabama's number 2 in scoring defense. You could say that maybe they haven't faced the most prolific offenses, but nonetheless, those are still impressive. The Gators' defensive line has been good. Does both offenses have to open it up more than they have, or do they have to be more conservative to be successful? I'll start with you, Ken.
I would say from Alabama's standpoint, we're going to be much more conservative. I don't think we're going to put our quarterback, A.J. McCarron, in a position to cost us the game by having to do something that maybe he not be comfortable with. We will be content to hand the ball to Richardson and Lacy and let them get their 2 yards, 3 yards, 2 yards, 3 yards, punt, until we get one of them to break a big one for 50 or 60 or 30 or 40 or whatever the case may be, and we're going to let it be in the hands of our defense. We will be content to play field position because I think from an Alabama standpoint, we will get a pick or two and we will score on one of those. So I think our defense will score in this game. We may get a special team score as well from Marquise Mays, who is just tremendous when he goes back there to field punts or receive kicks. So I'm thinking a special team score, a defensive score, and maybe 1 or 2 offensive scores, and that's probably going to be all that we need. This will not be a game where either of these teams probably scores over 30 points, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's like 20-17 or 17-14 for a final.
Roger?
Yeah, last I looked, I think the over/under was 44. And but if we can say that.
Sure.
Hey, Vegas is right all the time, so I'm going with that.
We're just providing information. We're not encouraging anything.
And,
entertainment purposes only.
Exactly.
So that was an astute comment by Ken there. And I agree generally. To answer your question specifically, I'm expecting Florida to open it up. As I said before, I think that they've been pretty vanilla, utilizing the backside of the running game. They know that they can win on talent just by get throwing swing passes to Dempsey and Rainey, basically. And I obviously know I think they know they can't beat Alabama just doing it that way alone. So I do expect to see some passing down the field. I expect to see the wide receivers utilized and the tight end utilized. And I'll say, as Ken alluded to, I think he has a more pessimistic take, obviously, as an Alabama partisan than I do. But realistically, I think that will be a key, and that's one of the big question marks. Will John Brantley be able to step up, and have that big passing game and be a major factor in winning the game?
Yeah.
And if he's not, well, then it doesn't bode well for Florida. So
is the jury still out on Brantley as far as Gator fans are concerned? Or they still don't know what? I mean, he got vilified last year. I thought some wrongfully so. I didn't think the offense system really fit him. It was a mess there with all the quarterback changes, as you mentioned, the rotation. This is more of a pro style, but is the jury still out on him?
I think it is, and I think that I guess my feelings are somewhat representative of most Gator fans with Brantley. I really want to see him do well. I agree. I thought it was a tragedy the way that he was utilized last year. As I've said before on on Talking Old School, I think if you tried to damage a player's confidence, if you tried to make a player fail, you would have utilized the player just the way that John Brantley was utilized last year. So I think Gator fans are pulling for him. I'm pulling for him. Having said that, I'm not brimming over with confidence. But I mean, I certainly,
right. This will be a big test.
I'm not saying that he can't do it either. So
right, one of the best secondaries. Ken, let's talk about what some people think is perceived. If you're going to find a weak spot in the defensive side of Alabama, is the defensive line. They lost Marcel Darius, who was a first-round pick in the NFL draft. Some of the Florida players, they've even come out this week on Twitter and say, hey, we're going to run all over them. They're confident that they can run over Alabama. Your thoughts on the Bama defensive line?
The defensive front three, it's probably the weak link, but I will put my linebackers who can run with either of those backs or any of those tight ends coming across the middle. And like I said before, I think the Alabama secondary, if it is not the best in the nation, certainly is the best in the SEC and maybe one or two in the nation. So I'm not concerned about any of those receivers trying to take our secondary. We can play with any wide receiver one-on-one and be fine. So it is going to be the key with our linebackers. And I think with Courtney Upshaw and Gerald Harris being able to do what they can do with running backs, and Dante Hightower just either being a guy that needs to run with a linebacker, a tight end if he needs to go on a passing play or shut down the run from his position, I think Alabama is fine. But as the defensive set, I would say the front three of Williams, Chapman, and Squire probably are the weakest link. But I will take my front seven against any running game, and the four defensive backs, as I said several times already, that I think they're the best in the nation, and they proved it against Arkansas. Arkansas is a much better passing team than we will face against Florida, even though I like John Brantley a lot. I think the receivers that Arkansas has are the best quartet in the SEC, and we handled them pretty well by rattling the quarterback at Arkansas, so I'm not concerned about what we'll have to do with Brantley if our linebackers will do what they need to do, stopping the run, helping the front three, and then keeping the tight ends at bay.
Roger, on the other side, Florida's defensive line very strong, easily. It was tremendous in the Tennessee game. How do they fare up against Alabama's running game, which ran all over Florida in last year's meeting in Tuscaloosa? Great question. I think it's going to be one of the real question marks and one of the real keys. But thus far, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one thing I wanted to mention earlier, should have mentioned earlier, is along with what Charlie Weiss has brought to the offense, one of the huge positive developments of this season and surprises to some extent for Florida has been the play of the defensive line. Yeah. And you've got a ton of talent there. People knew they had the talent. 3 or 4 of those guys were some of the most highly recruited players in the country, but as we know, highly recruited players don't always work out either. But I go back to the contrast between this year's coaching staff and last year's. For whatever reason, last year's coaching staff did not want to put any of those guys on the field. Now you've got coaches that have them on the field, and apparently they're have their minds right and have them playing enthusiastically. So I think obviously football in general and SEC football in particular, it all starts on the running game. Can you run or can you stop the run? So coming in, and I think you made a great point too. Statistically, both Florida and Alabama are at the top of the charts. Competition-wise, Florida certainly hasn't played a grueling schedule thus far. Right. Now, they will, a month from now, we won't be able to say that, of course. This month of October, things will change. But, so that just leads it to more of a question part. I wouldn't put too much stock in the quote-unquote statistical rankings, but I would say that there's a ton of talent, athletic talent on the D-line, and I think that's what makes this a very interesting game. Let's talk about the coaching matchup. Will Muschamp, first year at Florida, obviously coached under Saban at LSU from 01 to 04 and with the Dolphins in 05. How much does that play a role in this game and obviously moving forward with these two programs? Ken?
Go ahead, Roger.
Well, I think it's interesting. Of course, Will Muschamp was mentored by Nick Saban. He was on the staff of Nick Saban down at Miami, so I think that's adds a lot of flavor to the matchup for a variety of reasons. First of all, these guys both know each other. Yeah. Coach Muschamp will know how Coach Saban wants to prepare for a game and how to try to win it. Same thing about Saban about Coach Muschamp. As we were kind of kidding around before we started, as a partisan Gator, I think some Gators. I mean, some of us aren't so thrilled with the coziness of that relationship. To be facetious about it,
right.
Some of us wax nostalgic about the days that Steve Spurrier was going around throwing acid in everybody's face, and even before him, Charlie Pell back in the '80s.
Bring that back. I want to see that.
Yeah, especially Charlie Pell, an old Alabama guy. He was great for Florida.
He's the guy that built the program that exists today, and he gets very little credit for it.
That's because he put him on probation. He may not have done it as cleanly as he should have, but, I mean, he did build the foundation. You are correct. And I think Will Muschamp has the advantage in this because he's never been a head coach before. So all Nick Saban has to go on are the first 4 game films, and, again, playing nobody. Maybe you look at the Tennessee game really clear and say, okay, now, in certain situations, what did Will do? But, I mean, Will has been underneath Nick for 4 years, as you mentioned, Eric, 3 with LSU and 1 with the Dolphins. So he knows. I mean, he's been in the room, and he knows how Nick thinks and what Nick will want to do. Now, maybe not as much with Kirby Smart, the defensive coordinator, or McElwain, the offensive coordinator, but he certainly knows what Nick will do and what Nick's tendencies are. So I give Will Muschamp the advantage in this head-to-head matchup. Now, whether he's got the horses to pull it off, I don't know. But I would say if you just put X's and O's and trying to outguess each other on thinking 1 or 2 moves ahead on a chessboard, I think Muschamp's got the advantage.
Talk about this matchup, Florida-Alabama. It just sounds good. It's old school. It's tradition. They play for many SEC championship games. Who knows? They could play for one more this year, depending on how things go. I mean, the meaning of this game, what stands out to you guys?
Well, all I know is Alabama has never played anybody but Florida in the SEC championship game. So if they're not there, I don't know whether we'll be there or not either, because that's all we've ever played. And, in our last 10 games, we're 5-5. 5 of those have been SEC championship games, and Florida has the advantage, 3-2. And I just think that it is a marquee matchup, and these are 2 programs that really get the respect nationally, as they should, as the conference does. I mean, there is not a better conference in the country, football-wise especially, and these 2 programs are the marquee programs. When you talk to any of the coaches in the East or players or anybody who's a fan, the first team they say they have to get past is Florida. And when you talk about the West, it's always, well, we got to make sure Alabama's out of the picture, and then we'll see where the other, pieces fall.
And Eric, one of the interesting things about it is it's a newer rivalry to some extent in the SEC, in that both Charter members in 1933 of the Southeastern Conference, but for many years, first of all, Florida and Alabama didn't play as much as often as a lot of the other teams did, and there was a huge discrepancy in the stature of the programs. Alabama was a power in 1933. Florida really only emerged over the last several decades, at the last half of the 20th century. And then I have to give credit once again to that bring Steve Spurrier's name up again. The rivalry really blossomed and became an intense, very exciting national type rivalry with Spurrier, as Ken said, with both teams. When the SEC broke into divisions during the 90s, thanks to Spurrier, Florida dominated the East. During that time, Alabama was dominating the West, and they began to meet head-to-head in the SEC championship games, and also played some very stirring regular season games as well.
If you had one game to win, an SEC championship, do you take Bear Bryant or Steve Spurrier, guys?
Whether you want offense or defense. If it's offense, I'm going to take Steve, unless I want to run the wishbone, because I really love the wishbone. I think it's the best offense in the world to run because nobody can prepare for it in 1 week. But I'll take Spurrier offensively, but I'll take Bear defensively.
Well, what a great question, Eric. You could do a whole podcast or a whole show on that. And let me just say on that one, and I'll answer your question. As a Gator, I'm going to have to go with Spurrier. Wow. But I'll say that one of the interesting things about this are the 2 cultures of the 2 programs, and the Florida culture, which was largely part of Spurrier, even coming with his Ray Graves heritage, which was out of the Bobby Dodd tradition, and Bear Bryant, 2 antithetical approaches to winning. One, you had the hardcore, hard-nosed, physical, violent, tough approach, defense approach, as Ken said, of Coach Bryant. Spurrier came on, he just wants to go there and chunk it around a lot. And so it's a very interesting rivalry because of those the variety of two clashing cultures, if you will.
And see, that's why I wanted Steve Spurrier to be a coach at Alabama, because I like chunking around. When they hired what's his face from Texas A&M, gosh, no, I can't even think.
Francione.
No, the other one, the ones.
Gene Stallings.
Gene Stallings.
I said, why are we bringing a Neanderthal to Alabama? I mean, I'm tired of 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Give me somebody that can get us an offense, and of course, 2 years later he wins.
Yeah, but Ken, that's Alabama football. It wouldn't be the same if it wasn't that way.
No, Mike Shula was there. We got to throw it around a bit, and we got 10 wins one year, and then they went ahead and fired him, and that was another mistake in my opinion. But the only thing I really like about this game is it's in Gainesville, and Bama is 7-2 in Gainesville, so that's got to be another plus for us.
Wow. All right, boys. I'm going to give you each a couple of keys to this game and your prediction. Start with you, Ken. You're the visiting team, Alabama.
Keys to the game. If we can make Florida one-dimensional, especially shutting down the run, and make Jeff Brantley beat us, I think Alabama has a huge advantage. And if Alabama's running game can sustain the defensive front four of Florida, they've got the defensive lineman of the week in the SEC, Jay Howard, so that's somebody that we're going to really have to pay attention to and make sure we block him. And I think throughout the game, it may not be at the half, but by the end of the third quarter or the fourth quarter, Richardson and Lacey will have pounded enough where they will break a couple of big ones and get some scores. And the secondary of Florida, I don't think is just big enough to tackle either one of those guys if it comes down to a cornerback or a safety on either Richardson or Lacey. So I think those are the keys. If you want to score, I'm really going to think it's going to be low scoring, so I'm going to say 28 to 24 Bama.
Roger?
Well, first of all, before I give you my overview of it, I'll have to get in a word for Jay Howard and a personal comment. I played football at Apopka High School with Jay Howard's father, Coach Jerry Howard. So it's always great to watch Jay excel out there and get him a nice touchdown against Kentucky last week. The keys to the game, first of all, as almost in every SEC game, especially the big ones, both defensive lines. The first priority for both teams will be to stop the run, as Ken said. From Florida going there, and here's what I would expect. Yeah. I expect Florida to utilize the tight end more than they have thus far. I expect Florida to throw the ball down the field some and get the wide receivers in the game, and that'll be certainly, whether they can do that or not, will be a key to the game. And I expect to see Trey Burton in crucial situations.
And your prediction?
Very similar to Ken's. I'm not gonna predict Florida to win the game, but I will say after the game's over, unlike last year, Alabama will know that they have been in a game.
Yeah.
And I say that I think the last time I looked at the line started at 4, was down to 3, and I'd say that's with Alabama favored, and I'd say that's a very, very realistic assessment.
Gentlemen, any final thoughts before we wrap it up here? This has been good civil, Brian, right? More civil, more expected, right?
Right, but again, great insight at the same time.
It's civil because, the respect for the program, is as good as, when you look at this game on paper, people are saying, well, why are they even going to play? Because Alabama is so much better in every category. Yeah, maybe. But again, one big play in this game could change everything. A missed tackle, a punt return or a kick return or a blocked punt that Florida is good at doing. Any one big play could change the whole complexion of this game. So, to say that Alabama is a guaranteed winner in this game is foolish on anyone's part. So I'm just hoping it's going to be a great game. The weather is going to be fantastic so that we can't say, somebody slipped and sloshed or had a bad, slipped out. This is going to be a perfect night for football, and I hope the better team wins.
Just thanks for inviting me to join you guys. And I would just say I certainly would not be surprised if Florida won the game. Let's put it that way. And I think the rivalry. It's Florida and Alabama don't quite are in the close enough proximity. They haven't butted heads as many times as say Florida and Tennessee, and they're not right here in the state. With FSU. So you haven't had that hatred to fester. So it's more on a respect level.
Well, you guys talk about respect. So if I came in here and started defending San Diego State football, I'd probably get turned apart.
No, I respect. I remember the days of Dennis Shaw back
Ryan
in
Lindley,
the 60s.
No? Doesn't ring a bell? Okay.
Did they go play in the big house the other day?
They did. Yeah,
they represented pretty well.
Man, Brady Hoke, man, but that's a different story.
That's a whole other podcast for another time.
Yeah, Michigan took their coach.
Yeah, they took the coach. All right, Roger, tell the audience about your show on Saturdays.
Well, thank you, Eric, and we got a great one coming up, and guess what we're going to talk about?
Hey.
Florida, Alabama. We're going to have a retrospective from a number of players that have played on both teams. We'll have From the Alabama side, we'll start with the visitors. Coach Steve Sloan, one of the all-time great players in Alabama history, will join. We have some taped comments from him from the historic 1966 Orange Bowl game, where Alabama began the day number 4 in the nation. Pulled off a big upset against Nebraska and ended up as national champions. Coach Sloan was the most valuable player of that game. We'll also hear from Robin Parkhouse, who was defensive captain in the 1971 Tide, and that's the team that really established the dominance went to the wishbone offense in 71 and won the SEC. And then on the Florida side, we'll have Alan Trammell, who was a member of the 63 Gator team that beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa, which was only one of 2 times Bear Bryant ever lost in Tuscaloosa. And then also we'll have Chris Doring, the star of the 1994 SEC championship game, who scored the winning touchdown in a stirring 24-23 Gator win.
And Ken, you're going to be on Tracy Dent Show every Fridays, 1 to 3.
That is correct. I'm sure we'll talk NASCAR, golf, football, and we'll talk about those Tampa Bay Rays tomorrow. Amazing.
Unbelievable run by the Rays, and you both have another thing in common. Brian Whittaker will be producing both shows.
And let me add, Brian, we'll also have a segment of Tebow Truth, and Brian Whittaker will be joining me on that, of course.
There we go. Hey, I'm everywhere.
The Tebow Truth. Wow, we can have another hour on that. That should be fun. Check it out, guys, on ESPN1080.com. Check it out. Roger on Saturdays. Talking old school, 10 to 11. What time is it? 11 to 12. 11 to noon. And then, of course, Ken Allen joining us, Tracy Dent Show, 1 to 3 on Fridays. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. We'll do this again at some point. Maybe SEC Championship, right?
Would be nice.
Let's hope so.
I'd love to have Florida play us again in the championship. That would be great.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks,
we hope
Brian.
you've enjoyed this. Check ESPN1080.com coverage all weekend long for coverage of the Florida-Alabama game. We'll have a post-game video on the website with myself and Brent Beard breaking down the Gators-Alabama game. So for everybody here, I'm Eric Lopez. This has been ESPN1080.com.